Hello to Kirsty and to anybody that is watching today. Welcome to Power of the Parent in Conversation with. I am so excited to chat to Kirsty today. We have only met virtually this week, but I absolutely love so much of your messaging. It feels weird to kind of say this like looking at Kirsty, but Kirsty is the founder of Firefly, which is a fantastic organisation that I've been researching a lot and kind of doing a little bit of oh, that looks really interesting, and oh, that's a bit of me when you say things like that, quite a lot. So you at Firefly, you are all around supporting organisations through things like cultural change, leadership challenges. You've got a plethora of amazing coaching clients under your belt as well. So some that I'm like, lots of coaches would be looking, going, "Oh, that is dreamy." So you've got the likes of Skyscanner on there, JP Morgan, I think the Scottish Government were on there as well. And you are also a single mum to your daughter, who I believe has not long started university. And we're here today to talk about, well, I suspect we're probably going to talk about lots of different things. But I was really keen to talk to you about your experiences of being a single parent and what that's meant in the workplace for you as a founder as well, and kind of navigating so much. And also, I guess, a little bit about, because of your career and who you are and what you do, we all bring our own unique voice to some of this stuff, don't we? And some of our perceptions and beliefs are definitely informed by our career choices as well. So thank you so much for joining me.
My absolute pleasure.
Have I missed, without kind of reading off your bio, what else would you love people to know about you? What have I missed that are the key highlights?
I think you've done a great summary, given our paths only crossed relatively recently. Leadership development, culture change is and change in all aspects of life is what I specialize in, and I'm grateful that I get to do that all day, every day. I wouldn't be doing my job right now if I didn't say I also have my first book about to come out, which is called Untangled, and that is a guide to change. So it's informed by my life experience as well as my professional experience. And yeah, I'm just delighted to be here because the parenting bit of things is, it's been there for 18 years. So, and you're right, my daughter has just started university, and that brings its own challenges and opportunities as a parent and as a single parent, because it's another big life shift, right? So yeah, delighted to be here and excited to see where the conversation is going to lead us both.
Thank you so much. I'd love to dive in with assumptions. So I work with a lot of organisations where being a single or solo or co-parent is something that isn't necessarily talked about, or it comes with a heap of assumptions as to who you might be, or what your support network looks like, or what your ambition might be looking like, or actually in some cases blending the both. So it doesn't get talked about, but we know that some people might be single or solo or co-parents, and we're going to throw a load of assumptions at it. And there's kind of like these murky corners where people are just left, right and centre jumping to conclusions about other people. I would love to know if there are any particular assumptions that you have had to come up against or had to overcome in your experience as being a single parent.
And I think I'll give a kind of important piece of parenting context. So I was with my daughter's dad until she was 8, and then we separated. And for the first 2 years, she stayed with him as a primary carer. He had been a house husband. It made sense for her. It gave her stability to stay at the same school and those kind of things while we adjusted. And then for the last 8 years she's been with me. So we've had different phases, and I think that actually is one of the biggest assumptions that you face, is that things are constant. And you and I were talking about, even within an academic year, how things are not constant, and the turbulence that comes with any form of parenting, with the intensity of the pre-Christmas madness and all the other things that go with parenting, and the constant evolution of children. But I think when you're a single or a solo or a co-parent, that assumption that somehow things are steady state is a really dangerous one, because what it then means is that people are not willing to adjust and be flexible and to adapt and evolve and to meet you where you are. So, in those first couple of years, things looked very different. I remember the point when, I knew my daughter was going to be moving to me full time with just seeing her dad weekends and holidays. And actually talking to the people I was working with at the time, going, I don't even know what this looks like. I have no roadmap for this whatsoever. Because if you bear in mind at that point, I had been, co-parenting in a marriage situation where actually I had been the primary career person and my husband had been stay at home. And then he'd had her primarily, and I'd done the weekends and evenings and, midweek points and all those kind of things. And then suddenly it was going to be me. And I had no idea how to deal with that. I didn't know what that looked like at all. And so from an employment point of view and from a workplace point of view, I didn't even know what I was going to need, right? It wasn't like I could articulate, well, this is how it's going to be and this is what it's going to look like and this is the shape it's going to have. It was a conversation about, actually, things are about to change and I don't know what they're going to look like. And I'm fortunate that I have the confidence to have those kind of conversations and to lead them. But I think what's important for employers to recognize is not everybody will. And I know we're going to talk about kind of curiosity later on, but I think that's where an employer's staying close to someone and saying, tell me more, help me understand, what does support look like? Those types of key questions can make a huge difference. So that's the first assumption. And I have another one we might want to touch on in a minute, but I'll give you a chance to comment on that.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because that that's a massive assumption, isn't it? That you just think, when a family is separating, that is it that somebody, the default parent is going to be a woman if it's in a heterosexual relationship. So it's, straight away you can hear immediately some of those things that will have just been projected on you, and some you might have heard from other people, people might have just thought, and that's, you can immediately start to think like, I'm holding on to a narrative, or where does some of the guilt come in, or the unhelpful things that other people say, or the assumptions that other people are making that then get projected onto you, can be incredibly limiting and damaging, can't they?
Yeah, and especially if you're talking about that point in life where a relationship is changing and you're separating or whatever is happening, then actually that assumption can, those set of assumptions can feed into your own internal narrative. I know, and it's not something I talk about very often, but that decision to have my daughter stay with her dad was probably the most painful decision I've ever had to make. And it was excruciating. And to then, know that in some cases people would be making the narrative and the assumptions like you've just said, that, she was going to be with me. And well, if she wasn't, then goodness gracious, what does that say about me as a mother? And actually I knew the rationale and the detail and the story. And I think that's the thing about assumptions, is when we make assumptions and we act off the back of them without checking out whether they're valid or not, then we distance ourselves from people. And so whether it's, an employer making an assumption about an employee or vice versa, or whether it's actually parents making assumptions about their kids, we do the same, there's a kind of parallel that happens there. But really stopping and pausing and noticing what am I making up and what's the reality here? And do I actually know the reality? Am I willing to engage in that conversation is vital, I think.
And this would be a really beautiful place to start asking about curiosity. However, I'm keen to hear the other assumption. So I'm going to circle back to curiosity. What's the other assumption?
I think the other big one that came up when I was thinking about this kind of earlier on today was the possibly the biggest limiting assumption I faced in the time as a single parent compared to when I was, married and more co-parenting, is that you can flex with no notice. I think when you're in and I know I probably did it too, right? So, none of us are perfect, but I think when you're in a relationship, a long-term steady state relationship, and you are dual parenting a child or children, there is a lot more room, not always, but there's usually a lot more room for flexibility and adaptability, because the system has more give in it, right? The parenting system has more give in it. I think the biggest assumption that I faced in my working life as a single parent is that you have that same level of fluidity in the system. And some single parents do. So again, let's not kind of broad brush it, but based on my experience, I didn't. And I know many other single parents who don't, because not only do you have to set up a system that works for you, but you have to negotiate usually with somebody where there is not always the most effective, constructive, collaborative relationship in place. And so anything that involves any change in the status quo, whatever that looks like, and it might be a term time status quo or a, and a not term time status quo or a weeks, weekends, whatever your shape looks like, any shift in that, any requirement for change doesn't just get responded to by you in your own world. It automatically usually has a knock-on impact. And I remember the biggest example of that was after my marriage had ended, so in a single parenting environment, and I needed to go and do some work in Canada, and trying to negotiate what that looked like in terms of parenting support for my child at short notice was borderline impossible. That level of shift into a turbulent environment or a turbulent landscape can add so much pressure onto a solo working parent that they actually stop functioning. Now, I was fortunate that I did manage to negotiate it and work it out with my ex-husband, but it wasn't easy. And if you think about it in an organizational setting, usually when an employer is looking for flexibility from someone, there's automatically already a layer of pressure in that situation that gets compounded, and I don't think it gets seen.
Yeah. You can feel that, and you can see that playing out. And I hear it in the stories of a number of my friends and some family, that it's never just an internal work negotiation, it's all the stuff that wraps around it. And definitely some of those that I've spoken to somebody recently who is a solo parent and went through fertility treatment, and so she always knew, I say always, not always, but for a long time she knew that her route to parenthood was going to be a solo parent. And we had this amazing conversation the biggest assumption that people verbalized out loud to her was, well, if you're choosing to be a solo parent, then you must have loads of support around you. And the reality for this lady was that she didn't live anywhere near her family. Some of her family members didn't agree with what she was doing. And she had family dynamics to work through, as well as the reality of, think like going to some of the fertility appointments, for example, she would feel quite unwell afterwards. So then, and it was advised not to drive. So she was like, right, so I had to then factor in the cost of a taxi, and I was already paying for fertility treatment. It's all these things that you don't have to have walked in somebody's shoes to have an awareness of some of this stuff, but it just isn't given the space to be talked about. And of course, people don't owe us their story either, do they? So you don't have to tell people that you're going through with this. And I think that's, again, if I could add a little assumption in here, it is that people, just because we're opening up a conversation like this, doesn't mean that everybody's going to want to declare what their situations are.
No, and boundaries are really important. Like, boundaries really matter, and particularly, but not exclusively, like you're talking about in terms of that earlier stage of life, in terms of fertility, pregnancy, those types of things. There's a lot of absolutely appropriate level of confidentiality and personal story about that, which actually, like, you don't want to have to talk about things, and you shouldn't need to, right? People shouldn't need to know all of the details to be able to understand and view you as a human being who is effective in the organization and effective in the workplace, and who has an additional factor in their life that needs to be taken into account. And people get to own their own stories, right?
Absolutely. This is where I'm going to ask you about curiosity, because I know that is something that you are incredibly passionate about. And I definitely see a link between removing assumptions and having some quality curiosity, whilst honouring boundaries, obviously. But from your perspective, where are some of those kind of nuggets, and how do we embrace that curiosity to help remove some of these assumptions?
I think, I mean, in my eyes, curiosity is like the antidote to assumptions, right? So, you know, wherever there's assumptions, if you add some curiosity, genuine curiosity, without nosiness. And I was thinking about this morning, and I was thinking, gosh, why am I so good at being curious? And well, because I've always been nosy, actually, if I'm being completely honest. And I remember, you know, being in organizations and working in my early career and kind of taking a glance at stuff on the printers just in case there was anything of any curiosity, which I probably shouldn't admit to, but you have much more secure printer mechanisms these days, so everything is safe. But I think when we are able to be more curious, not to know all of the detail and not to know all of the ins and outs and nuts and bolts and widgets of things, but more to understand where someone is at, what they need, and what good support looks like, and to be willing to stay in that conversation long enough that you can let it unfold, because that person doesn't always know. I mean, I've been in points where, like I said, when I was becoming the primary carer, I was like, I have no idea what I'm going to need, and actually staying with that conversation long enough to see what emerged in terms of my needs, and to check back in and not have it be a once-off conversation, I think is vital. So, you know, from an employment point of view, from a line manager leadership point of view, being willing to sit down in a conversation and say, look, you know, Charlotte, I'm not expecting you to have all the answers right now. I'm just keen to understand, where are you? What do you think you might need? And how can I keep the conversation open with you so that as things shift, you feel that we can keep having those conversations? And it's not about then the individual prescribing. It becomes more of a conversation about, actually, this is what I'm experiencing right now. It'd be really helpful if we could have flexibility around this, and to balance those needs. I mean, I remember, gosh, my daughter would have been about 11, and there used to be a regular work call I had to be on a 4 o'clock on a Monday. I was doing a kind of bigger, longer term interim type role in an organization, and it was 4 o'clock every Monday, and I could not sort out the school pickup for various reasons. I just couldn't. And Charlotte, I'm kind of ashamed to say it, but I used to sit in the car, and she used to make notes for me based on the call, because it was the only way I could handle the situation. Now, I was working at that point with someone who was really pretty intractable in terms of their willingness to flex, etc. And I did try and get that meeting shifted to a time when I could do it. I did everything I could to try and sort of parenting. It wasn't my proudest parenting moment, but if there had been a level of more curiosity about, okay, you know, what is possible, what's not possible, what are the parameters that we're working in to try and achieve the same outcome, that could have led to a different solution. And curiosity just looks like simple questions, right? It looks like sitting down and saying, help me understand, tell me more about, you know, what's important for me to know, what do you want to share with me? Those really simple questions are not difficult skills to use, but we forget because we go into, well, I must know what they're dealing with, and therefore I'll act as if I do, rather than going, oh, okay, actually, I realize I don't really know what your life looks like right now. Tell me more about what's important for me to know, what context is relevant, because then that keeps the other person in the driving seat. I also think curiosity is a parenting superpower, but that's potentially a conversation for another day.
Absolutely. There are two things that stick out for me in what you've just shared. One is those Mondays with your daughter in the car. I mean, I have heaps of compassion for you, because I think that's it's a different time, isn't it? If we go back those sort of 7 or 8 years, we were working in quite a different work environment, and it sounds like you did the absolute best you could for everybody. And I bet she picked up some great note-taking skills.
Yeah, she'd be good in a meeting anytime in the future.
And that, you know, that she's had an exposure to what you did, how you did it. Like, sometimes my girls are a bit younger than that. They're 6 and 9, and sometimes they're like, they kind of know what I do. My 9-year-old definitely knows what I do and has from quite a young age. My 6-year-old's a little bit more of a law unto herself, and she has a vague idea. But every now and again, they will be like, what are you doing, mummy? Or how is that working? And I actually do really love sharing it with them, because I love to be able to show them what I'm crafting, what I'm creating. So I'm sure you've done so much for her there without probably, recognizing it. Not that you need my validation, but I actually really loved that story in lots of ways. And then the second thing is, when you were talking there about line managers and imperfection, and that's it, isn't it? We're not striving for perfect here. We're striving for progress, I think. Anyway, I have taught my children we don't say practice makes perfect. We say practice makes progress in our house.
Yeah, absolutely.
And every time they say it, like, I'm like, oh yes, I quite like that. If I have very few parenting wins, so if that's going to be it, I'll take that.
Yeah.
And where was I going with that? Yeah, so this idea that we have to, particularly if I think about it from a line manager perspective, and it came up just this week. I was running a workshop in London, and this came up quite a few times, that fear of, I'm not going to get it 100% right, so I therefore don't want to say anything at all. But actually, that's getting it wrong in itself. And basically embracing imperfection. And I know that's one of your taglines, isn't it, about helping people who are perfectly imperfect, those of us that are imperfect in the world, to change the world.
Absolutely. And I think partly that's naturally, it's been a learning for me over the course of my career, my working life, my parenting life. Nobody is perfect, and you're absolutely going to run yourself into the ground if you're trying. And because I've trained as a facilitator of Dare to Lead with Brené Brown, then obviously a lot of her work is also driven off the basis of that body of work and kind of school of thought. So I think it is vital. And you're right. I do personally believe that involving our kids in our work and our professional lives is important. I have done that very intentionally for a very long time. My daughter has been involved in lots of aspects, and I'm fortunate in some ways, because I've run my own business now for nearly 13 years. So I've had a lot of opportunity, but also a lot of flexibility with my clients. And I'm thinking on the wall over there's a speech that she wrote for one of my team strategy days when she was about 8 or 9, and it's framed, which I love, about what she saw as being what was important in the business. And also actually thinking about how supportive some of my clients have been. There was quite a prolonged period of time when my daughter had really pretty severe separation anxiety, to the point where one residential I was due to do with clients down in Southampton, and I live up in Scotland, and my parents ended up having to bring her down, and she had to stay in the same place because the level of distress it was causing her for me to be away was too high. So being able to articulate what I needed at that point, and from my point of view, also being willing to not even try and gloss over what was going on, not even try and pursue that I'm the professional, I'm perfect, and I have all my stuff sorted out. Because the reality was, it was like, whitewater rafting at that point in my parenting world. And every day was different, and I never knew quite what we were going to be at. And so acknowledging that vulnerability with people where there is at least a little bit of trust. And I do think, as a parent in an organizational setting, you need to seek out the people who you can lean into, and where you can know that you are safe enough to share some of what's going on. Because I think everybody needs a support person. Everybody needs to have somebody where they can send them a message going, oh my God, how am I going to get through this week? And if you haven't got one, I would suggest finding one online, or a lot of particularly from a solo parenting point of view, there's a group called Frollo, Frolo, who do a huge amount of stuff for solo parents. Actually came largely too late for me, but really supportive. So finding a support buddy is really important as well. And that might be someone in work, it might be someone in a different function. Sometimes that helps to have somebody who's not in your kind of day-to-day working environment, but who is still understanding of the organizational context.
I'm actually going to be speaking to Kirsten from Furlough.
Okay, well, there we go. There we go. Our paths are all
it really wasn't planned.
yeah.
What you've just said there actually leads me into my next question, which is about those standout pieces of support. Because something that I often find, if I think about this as in an organisational context, a lot of organisations that I either work with or come across, or just see talking about themselves, they rely quite heavily on policies as their show pony. You know, we've got this amazing award-winning policy, it's got all the gold stickers, blah, blah, blah. And then the lived reality for people can be something quite wildly different.
Yeah.
And I mean I'm not suggesting that we suddenly pull a policy out for every single thing, because actually, and this makes some organisations quite nervous of me, I don't actually think policies are the be all and end all. I think they have their place and we do need them, but actually where the real magic happens is in those leadership moments, in those quieter things that people aren't watching, but you have that support that is not written down somewhere. It's just what we do, like you said before, human to human. So one of the things that I often find is that there are pockets of support happening, but we almost need this like support amnesty, because nobody really knows what anybody else is doing, and we don't hear about the good stuff. We only hear about when things go wrong. Yeah. So have you personally experienced anything, either from clients or people that you've worked with, or friends or family as well, that have been really, you know, they've made a real difference to you?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a few things, and I think you're right about policy will only take you so far. The application of day-to-day lived behaviours is what makes the difference on the ground. And I think, you know, what I'm hearing, and I'm going to reflect on further, is that helpful challenge to say we need to talk about it more. We need to talk about more of what is actually happening in more relatable ways. And because a lot of my clients, well, all my clients and most of our clients as a business in Firefly are really senior executive leaders, so C-suite, and, you know, one or two layers down from that. I'm kind of going to take the challenge back to them actually and say, what are you doing to talk about what you're doing? Because a lot of them are acting from a place of compassion, acting from a place of empathy and curiosity, and having some of the conversations and then taking action to support people. But it's probably not visible in those organizations at all, actually. And there's quite an interesting piece for me around reflecting on the visibility of those kinds of things tends to come more about the story of Charlotte came back to work and she had this level of flexibility, rather than actually Charlotte's line manager made this difference and here are the questions they used to ask and answer, and, you know, those kind of things. So I think there's quite an interesting spin on the narrative there about where are we putting our focus? Are we putting it on the individual? Are we putting it on the system and the individual around that person at the center? And when I was thinking about support, really that it does come down to individuals who have been supportive. I've worked with clients where they've maybe had pregnancy losses and then, needed that level of support on a very short-term basis, but then again in that way where it's not fixed and it's not static, and the kind of checking in, and then obviously if there are then subsequent pregnancies, then that brings a different dynamic as well, in terms of nervousness and anxiety and, you know, health concerns and all those kind of things. In terms of my own lived experience, I think, you know, I was reflecting on it, when my marriage did end, the person I was working with most closely at that point of time was incredibly supportive and actually ultimately strong-armed me into taking some time off, because my marriage ended and then my mum ended up in hospital with appendicitis and septicemia within, I don't know, at the time it seemed like it wasn't connected, but it was in like 3 weeks or something ridiculous, you know. And it took this individual that I was working with to literally say, like, you need to take some time off, and actually got me to talk to someone in occupational health, which at the time I was resistant to. And I think it took that level of courageous support from them to kind of to hear what I pushed back with in terms of challenge, and to hold the line anyway from a place of support. So I think brave support is very helpful, and not always easy, because there could be a sense that, okay, they're pushing back, maybe I'll ease off a bit. And then the other thing I think is something really simple that everybody can do, and it doesn't have to be difficult, is just that checking in. I mean, we see a lot of stuff on social media, but really checking in with curiosity and a willingness to hear what the other person says, a willingness to listen and say, yeah, how are you really? And I do it even in shops. I mean, I'm kind of a little bit dangerous when it comes to this, because I actually really care about people. And so, if I was out for dinner with my daughter last night, and actually talking to the waiter about how his day was going and what was going on for him, because building those bridges human to human, you never know what difference that's going to make. It may not seem like it makes a difference in the time, but who knows whether they're going to come back to you and say, actually, can I have a conversation, because they know you're willing to listen without judging and making assumptions, and to then see what support looks like. Do Charlotte, if we could do that in every organization in the world, you and I would probably have less work to do, right? Doing different work.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for sharing all of that. I think I am on absolutely the same page with so much of what you've just shared. I think some of sometimes the simplicity is overlooked, and I often am heard saying the phrase "common sense isn't always common practice," and because a leader somewhere that I worked with, I'm sure it was at my previous employer, I'm sure somebody said it one day, and I was like, yes, that's exactly what's going on here. And I think a lot of what we're talking about, that is what it is. It is common sense. We don't have to overcomplicate this stuff, but that doesn't mean that it gets done. And who is it that says, is it somebody like Glennon Doyle that says simple isn't always easy? And that's, similar sentiment, really.
Absolutely.
Which, talking of sentiments, something that you have on your website is, there's a line, I'm going to completely butcher it now, but it says something like, pack up your messy desk and your slippers and something, I can't remember now, I'm so sorry. But when I read that, I was like, oh yeah, because, and the reason I was like so excited about it was because I just think there are so many of us that have to hide parts of ourselves, and that has one hell of an impact in the workplace. And we're talking today in the context of being a single parent. For you, it might be other people who would describe themselves as solo parents or co-parents. If anybody is watching this as a single or solo or co-parent and thinking that they're having to hide part of who they are and how they make life happen in the workplace, and I don't want to be reductive, because I know that there are heaps of things that we would want to say to those people, but have you got any sort of like standout favorite things that you would perhaps say to that parent to be able to let some of that hiding go? And I'm also going to ask you the same from a line manager perspective as well, but if we start with parents.
So I think the first thing is, sorry about the sirens in the background.
Can't hear them now.
Okay, the sirens just went flying past. I think the first thing is to recognize that it's natural and it's okay, because it comes from a place of your brain trying to keep you safe, right? So the first thing is, let's not start beating ourselves up about the fact that we're, not necessarily revealing parts of ourselves in the workplace. The second thing I would say is find someone who you can start to build more trust with and start to share more. And remember that you are the one who owns your story. So, being vulnerable is not about sharing everything with everybody. It's about small pieces over time. And I think taking some time to reflect on what are the bits that matter is kind of back to some of the earlier questions I was putting into our conversation about what context matters, what is it important for you to share. And I'm a big believer in the power of journaling, right? Of just writing stuff down, actually getting stuff out of your head and onto paper, I think is so powerful. And so if there's someone who's watching and they're thinking, yeah, that is me, actually, there's bits that of my context in my life that it would be helpful for my line manager to know, I would kind of maybe draw a circle on a piece of paper and write, and maybe two, actually, kind of thinking this through, start with a circle in the middle, which is what do I already share with them, and then a bigger circle of what do I not share that I'd like them to know, and then a bigger circle of they're not knowing that because they don't need to, right? And then I would pick one of the bits in that middle layer of they don't know it, but it would probably be helpful if they did, because it would because it would help them understand what's going on, or because it would make it easier for me to ask for what I need, or easier for me to articulate what's going on. And I would start to pick some of those things in that middle circle and start to look at, okay, what would it take for me to be comfortable enough to share that? You're never it's like the simple, easy thing, right? You're never going to be fully comfortable. That's why I've got on my website, like, pack up the fluffy slippers, they're coming along with us, right? We're taking the mess with us. So in a messy, vulnerable, imperfect way, what's one of those things in that middle circle that, actually my boss doesn't know that, but if they did, it might explain why I'm always finishing at, X point, or why I'm not willing to do A, B, and C. And so think about what's the bit you want them to know, and then start to have those conversations.
Thank you. That's the bit I didn't add, actually, that it doesn't just say pack it up, it's pack it up and bring it with us. That was
it's all coming along, right?
Yeah, we're not putting it anywhere, it's coming with us. So yes, thank you. And then I guess same question from a line manager perspective, really. If a line manager or a leader or whoever is watching this and thinking, right, I know I've got some people on my team, or maybe you haven't got people on your team, but you are here for the greater good, or you're the person that's running the parental support network, or anybody that's got any sort of anything about them where they're thinking, right, I want to make the workplace a better place for everybody. But specifically for those who are single, solo, or co-parents, what would you kind of suggest to line managers to be able to really start to shake things up a bit?
So I think it's 2 or 3 things. The first thing is, be explicit about the fact that you don't have all the knowledge and information. I think it is so powerful for someone in any context, and in this context that we're talking about this morning, to say, I've realized that I don't have all of my understanding and my knowledge and my level of awareness about what it's like to be a solo, single, or co-parent in this organization, and I want to understand more. So I am listening to Charlotte talking with great people on line about what that might look like, and I want to understand more of the lived experience of people in this organization. So help me understand, tell me more about where would you recommend I go and look to find out more. There's a parallel for me between, I did a lot of work a few years ago with leaders from ethnic minority backgrounds. And for me, it was very humbling, because I realized how much I didn't know and how much learning I had to do. And I do believe it's not always the responsibility of people in specific communities to do the work for everyone else. So I don't think this is about single, solo, and co-parents, having to share everything and inform and educate everybody, because I think there's enough plethora of resources out there that people can go and find out what's going on, but be willing to share that you don't know everything, that you don't have all the knowledge. Demonstrate that you are listening and actively pursuing more knowledge and understanding, and keep checking in. If I'm thinking of doing this, is that going to help or is it going to hinder? Help me make that better. This is an idea of something I think we might try within our team or our function or our organization. Help me improve it. What would make that even better? What would make that even more effective? And having that vulnerability as a leader or line manager to be willing to lean in and create together, rather than having to come with a tablet of stone that says, well, we're going to do these 4 things, and every single solo and co-parent in the organization goes, why the heck would you do that? That isn't going to help, it's going to make it worse. So those would be my top tips.
Brilliant, thank you. I love how practical they are, and as a big fan of kind of actually listening to your people, the final one that you shared there is a big one for me. So thank you so much. And that brings us to the end of our conversation today. So thank you so much for coming and chatting to me and sharing your experiences and wisdom. It's been fantastic. I'm going to, if you are, wherever you are watching this, there will be a link to all the work that Kirsty does, either in the show notes if you're watching on YouTube, but if you're watching this on my website, there will also be a transcript of this interview, and you can go down to the end and have a look, and I will pop a link into Kirsty's book as well. So thank you so much, Kirsty. It has been a pleasure.
My pleasure. Happy to talk to you.
Thank you. Take care.